Yeah, we start our meeting tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa syukrillah wa la hawla wa la quwata illa billahil alil azim. This evening, tonight, we are lucky, we are more than happy for Martha Beck from Lyon College, the city of Arkansas, United States, already with us. Then tonight we will discuss, this is the second online meeting that we already have and plan for a series of 3 meetings. And then for those who are Muslim, I invite you for us to recite Basmalah, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And then tonight or this evening topic is about teaching citizen and gain wisdom, learning from ancient Athens. Prof. Martha Beck is a professor in the philosophy. She is teaching in the Lyon College, and what her experts is about the Greek ancients. So without further ado, I would like to invite Prof. Martha Beck to present 15 to 20 minutes, and then after that we have time to open a Q&A. Time is yours, Prof.
Okay, well, thank you for having me once again. I think it will take more than that, but okay, so I'll try to go through this. So the first day, last time, I talked about the Greek religion, and it had the 7 deities, and each one represents living for the sake of something greater than yourself. So the religious tradition is spiritual. Spirit means living for the sake of something greater than yourself. It's pluralistic. There's lots of different ways to do that. It's humanistic, because you can't be completely human unless you choose one of those sacred passions. It's dialectical, because you can't obsess about just one. You have to balance them. So you have to talk. Every time you make a decision, you have to decide what's best in relation to everybody else. And that's a matter of conversation. So that sounds a lot like Panchasila to me, right? Religious pluralism, humanism, wisdom through deliberation, unity in plurality, and also social justice, because the realm of political life is natural and it has to play a large role in human society. So this tradition developed over time until it culminated in Athens, Athenian culture and civilization. So what does it mean to be free? The Athenians considered themselves to have the greatest democracy, and the citizens had the most freedom to choose how they wanted to live. So I'm going to pretend I'm Plato, and I'm going to speak in the voice of Plato, and this is what he would say. All right, so I am a universalist. I think there is human nature, and I think human cultures are accountable to cultivate human nature, cultivate the citizens' natural capacities to the highest level possible for as many citizens as possible. So I thought I was just lucky that I happened to be born into Athens. One of my uncles wrote the Constitution of Athens. And this constitution was about the rule of law. And it was citizens taking turns ruling and being ruled. And as opposed to a monarchy that inherited power, or an aristocracy, a group of citizens, a group of families that inherited political power. we had a much more egalitarian system. And I thought it was the best system. So I want to tell you about my city, and then I'm going to tell you about all the things we had to develop democracy and how we corrupted it and lost it and ended up electing a dictator who was also one of my uncles. So one of my uncles wrote the Constitution, another uncle destroyed the Constitution. So then I started a school to try and educate future leaders about what not to do and what not to do if they want to have a flourishing society. You should always rule for the benefit of the ruled and always give citizens an opportunity to cultivate their own capacity to govern and be governed. Even within a monarchy and an aristocracy, you have to use that power to promote human well-being. So what we had here was Athens. Athena was the patron goddess of Athens. She was the goddess of wisdom, justice, and war, but only just war. So wherever you were in Athens, the shadow of the temple to Athena was cast over you. People looked up to it, and they were supposed to think about Athena and aspire to wisdom and justice, and especially be careful about going to war too soon or being too brutal, because that's the most important thing to avoid. All right, so this is the level where families grow up. This is the bios, the family system to survive. This is the commercial system where people survive more efficiently. And then as they walk up toward the temple, we'll see that the theater is built on the side of the hill. The marketplace is over on the other side of the hill. And all of this fits together. All right, the other thing is as you walk up, it's a slow walk. The steps are thin and they're broad because you want to integrate your biological self with your spiritual self. It's not another world like a cathedral where you step in and you're shot to heaven. You just try to control thinking about another world. It's not another world. It's the spiritual dimension of our natural existence. All right. The Greek temples were built so that they looked like they were proportional. They actually weren't, but they look that way from a human point of view because nature is ordered. And so the culture imitates nature by creating institutions that are the fulfillment of human nature, but the buildings are ordered and they're integrated with human nature. The natural world and culture are all parts of a much larger whole. Across from the temple to Athena is a courthouse, because these were the sacred duties of every citizen were to be called by lot. So if you were a Greek male with some property, your name was put into a hopper, and your name was chosen simply by chance, and you would sit on a jury and decide the guilt or innocence of someone, and you would sit on the assembly and vote on human affairs. You had to learn how to use your reason. So the gods, your sacred duty is to use your reason to determine what's just and unjust. You had to evaluate the facts. You had to assess, do the facts sufficiently prove the guilt of the accused or not? And then the jury members, again, they talk to each other. It's dialectical. They have to have a dialogue to come up with a final conclusion. Same with the assembly. People would go up in front of the assembly arguing for this policy or that policy. Then the assembly members had to together make a decision. So it's community-based, it's law-based, it's dialectical. Okay, so on one side of the Acropolis is the theater. And so if you remember the stories of the deities and the tragedians, there was a religious festival every year, and there was a contest among the writers of tragedy. So each poet sent in a series of 3 tragedies and then a satyr play, which was this rowdy comedy, because you had to have some release, some emotional release after going through all that tragedy. So the way a tragedy is designed is a story of human beings who are possessed by the gods. And they make mistakes. They have good intentions, but they make mistakes. So one example is, let's see, the Bacchae. There's a leader of a city-state who tries to kick out Dionysus, which Dionysus is the wild, crazy, emotional, irrational god. He's the opposite of Apollo, the god of reason. And there was a leader who tried to kick him out of the city, which means emotional repression. And it doesn't work. He becomes obsessed and he ends up killing his mother. But the point is that the tragedies magnify these human emotions or human ideas, and every character has an argument for why they're making this decision. But most of the time, their choices are wrong. And so people have to look at these characters making these decisions. And the plays are written so that you can identify with the characters. You can imagine being those people, but they still make a mistake. And so the audience members are supposed to learn, oh, I don't want to do that. If I get into a situation like that, I need to be able to identify, oh, this is analogous to the situation in the tragedy, and I don't want to make that mistake. You flush out that desire, like I'm feeling the desire to repress all wild and craziness in the city, and I have to flush that out. So that was emotional education, and you have to go through that. A lot of the plays are about your relation to your parents because you depend on them so much that if they make a mistake, the child is crippled emotionally. And so you have to go through all that stuff in your own psyche before you can go to the top and actually make decisions in the court. You can be wise and you can be just and make decisions that are rational in the courthouse and in the assembly. There was also the Olympics. The Olympics was a religious holiday celebration. The idea was a sound body and a sound mind. So it's a part of human excellence, and it should be honored. Hera was the goddess of honor. There was a huge temple to Hera. And the way the Olympics ran were you had laws and institutions, and you had a ruler, a Zeus character, right? The people running the stuff are running for the well-being of the participants. And you also had Apollo, the god of reason, who set up the laws, and he had to be objective, right? You couldn't favor somebody in your tribe. You had to make judgments based on the facts, on reason. So long before Athens actually evolved, there were all these customs and traditions oriented towards citizen engagement and rational thinking that united reason with emotion, integrated culture with nature, integrated emotion and thought, integrated character and a way of life. Okay, so let's see, at the top of the hill overlooking the marketplace was the temple to Hephaestus, the god of the forge, or the crafts. And so when you're at the marketplace and you're buying your material goods, the shadow of Athena reminds the sellers that you should be just and you should be wise. You sell good products at a good price. And the temple to Hephaestus, the craftsman, reminds you that you should make things that are well crafted. Don't sell junk. Sell something you've put your mind to and it's worth having. So here's the marketplace. So people would come, the rural people would come in on Saturday to buy their stuff. And when they got there, there was a media center. So the place, there were apartments for people who had been chosen by lot to serve on the jury and the assembly, but they lived in the rural areas, so they needed a place to stay. Outside of those apartments was posted the jury trials that were being discussed at that time. And then there was a council that decided which issues come before the assembly in what order. And outside of where they met was a list, an announcement of what issues are being decided in the assembly. And then there was an open space where people were supposed to go and talk about public affairs. And they needed to do this every week so that they got this history in their head of what's being decided. Was it decided well or poorly? How did it go? What are the consequences? So people couldn't read. There wasn't a lot of written stuff. It was all oral, but it was set up so everyone developed in their mind a whole history of better and worse choices in relation to being a good citizen. This is the temple to Poseidon, the god of the sea. And here is Zeus. So last time when I was talking about the gods, I talked about them as representing psychological. They're symbolic, they represent powers of the psyche. But there was also a literal interpretation that they lived on Mount Olympus. And also Zeus, for example, there was the god of the thunderbolt. So there were the Olympic gods were also used to explain natural events. But there were little schools of thought that were seeking a natural foundation for the scientific world and for events such as lightning. So they disagreed with each other, but they would be out on the islands, living in little communes that supported their worldview. So they would have different views, and that was okay, you know. Then the medicine, there was so much scientific inquiry, freedom of scientific inquiry. They had developed a pretty complex medical system, and they even had a special island where there was a center for women's health. Okay, so in theory, at its best, people had dialogues about beauty, Aphrodite, about truth, and the truth according to Apollo, truth according to Zeus, goodness, what is virtue? And let's see, I'm going to skip over that, Corinth. Delphi was a center, I mentioned that last time, for international law. And the kings, the rulers, the monarchs or the aristocrats, if they wanted to go to war, if they would go to Delphi for advice, because this was the center of universal wisdom. So every leader was accountable to a higher standard of justice. And they had to go to Delphi to get advice before they could legitimately go back and declare war or do whatever it is they were asking about. And the oracle did not give them an answer. It gave them a riddle that they had to solve. And this is brilliant, I think, because they can't blame the oracle. Just like in a literalist religious tradition, you can't find a quote in the Quran or the Bible to justify your lousy, your wicked actions. You have to take responsibility for it because the riddle is ambiguous. That's just like life. Life is one big riddle, and it's complex and ambiguous. And you have to take responsibility for the ways you interpret life, the situations you're confronted with. And it also integrates, there's a long story, which I can't, no way I have any time for it, but it integrates reason and emotion. Know thyself is about your spiritual life and nothing in excess. The big blockages, the big reasons people go wrong is they want pleasure, excess pleasure, wealth, power, glory, right? Those are all the corrupting influences, and they drive people to use their talents for the wrong goals. Okay, so Delphi has a theater and Delphi has an Olympic stadium. So it's always a sound mind and a sound body. Flush out those emotions before you're going to be able to understand that riddle. Okay. Then this is the image. Hygeia is the goddess of health, mental, spiritual, and physical health. All right, so what had happened? So we had this fantastic system. We had this fantastic city. I loved my city. And we went to war against Sparta. Sparta was a military state. We were the free and open society. We hated each other. We thought each other were barbarians. But we gradually changed from just being defensive, protecting ourselves, honestly worrying about security, to building a league. Athens had a league of city-states. So all the other city-states, none of the other city-states wanted to get involved with this, but Sparta and Athens forced them to take sides. And Athens was the more powerful city. They should have won this war, but they changed from just being defensive, protecting themselves and protecting democracy and protecting civilization, to empire building. So they cared more about power than they cared about a free and open society. So they corrupted everything. So how did they do that? Well, first of all, where did they get all the money to build all these wonderful monuments and temples? Well, they taxed their friends so that none of their ally city-states had any money to set up their democracy. And then they took the plunder from the war. You should never profit from war by spending the money you make from your conquest, because then you will just get more war, right? So they had an economic reason to keep the war going. So the whole financial foundation for all these wonderful monuments, tributes to democracy, was corrupt and anti-democratic. What happened to Athena? The decisions about wisdom and justice became more and more extreme. The Athenians in the assembly listened more to rhetoric, to people who, there was one point at which they were deciding whether to go to Sicily to protect their food source. And one of the seasoned generals said, no, like, we don't have enough ships. We aren't that rich or powerful. We're already fighting on 2 other fronts. We can't do this. And he was well seasoned, you know, he knew how to win battles. But another citizen who was outrageously impious, he got up there and said, oh, you old fuddy-duddy, you're just scared. Like, we're Athens, we can do anything. We're the greatest. So they voted with Alcibiades and they overstepped, right? They got way overextended and they lost, and then they started to decline. That was the beginning of the loss of the war, was they thought there were no limits, and they found out otherwise. So the decisions in the courthouses became more corrupt because foreigners came to educate the best and the brightest young people in supposedly how to be a good gentleman and a good citizen, but it really was just how to speak persuasively so you can get whatever you want in the assembly or in the jury trials. And when the foreigners were asked, well, do you have to teach justice and virtue? They just said, I don't know, like the Athenians know their values. I'm only teaching the skill. It's not my fault. Okay. And so the courts were corrupted. The citizens expected to be manipulated. They didn't try to use their reason. They just sat back and expected to be emotionally manipulated, and the same in the assembly. So those were corrupted. The theater was corrupted. The stories about Zeus were, instead of being cathartic, oh, don't do that, I'm tempted to do this, the Athenians actually thought that the poets were encouraging it. And they were saying, oh, boys will be boys, you know, sex and aggression, that's just the way life is. And so they completely lost the educational, emotional education behind their tradition. The Olympics the athletes became highly specialized, and everybody else was a couch potato and was out of shape and ate too much, drank too much, didn't get any exercise. So the Olympics turned into a big show, and the athletes weren't even that healthy because they were so specialized. The craftsmanship of Hephaestus was corrupted because now all he made were swords and shields. He didn't make beautiful cities or beautiful handcrafted furniture or pottery or fashion. All he did was make war toys. The marketplace was corrupted. The idea behind it was they had international trade. If you have people coming in from all the city-states, you're going to develop economic bonds with them. You're not going to go to war. But more and more, the trade agreements, the Athenians were more and more aggressive and unfair and oppressed the people. And they also became moral relativists. They said, oh, they have those gods in that city-state. So they bought their little, statues and had all this exotic stuff from other places, but they didn't believe in anything anymore. It's all relative. Everybody just has different beliefs based on where they were born. Then the temple to Poseidon is overlooking the sea and watching the Athenians and the Spartans engage in this unjust empire building kind of war. Then, as the city started to decline, the citizens wanted to return to a literalist view of the religion. That we have to get back to the good old days when everybody believed the same things about religion. We have to get rid of those thinkers that try to think there's natural causes because the gods are punishing us for hubris overstepping our bounds, trying to think there's a rational foundation. We should just worship the gods and try and get their favor so we don't get wounded. So another reason they were off on the islands with their speculative thinking was so they didn't get killed for being heretics. At the women's health center, a lot of women came there because they were getting abused. So they came there for protection against male aggression. So now all the dialogues became corrupted. And so in the midst of all of that, Socrates, this is the Peloponnesian War. Socrates walked around Athens, got up in the morning, went to the Agora. Whoever he ran into, he asked, what is justice? What is courage? He asked the generals, what is courage? He asked the political leaders, what is justice? They couldn't answer him. So he wanted them to be transparent and accountable, which is what you have to have in a democracy. People with power have to explain what they're doing and why it's a good thing. Instead of being considered the best citizen, he got killed for being not believing the city's gods and corrupting the youth, because the youth used to follow along with them and watch their authority figures fall on their face and be exposed as being ignorant or corrupt. And so he got killed for it. And there's the hemlock. He drank hemlock. That was his punishment. And so now we have dialogues about Athens. So we read Plato's dialogues. We think about, we apply it to our own societies. What has changed? What hasn't? Where is my society in that trajectory of developing a democracy? Are we moving more and more toward democracy? Or have we corrupted it? And are we in decline? And if we are, how can we correct for that? How can we change the way young people are educated? How can we change the way the political leaders, the rhetoric they use? So Plato gives you, this huge model, all these dimensions, and hands it to you, and you have to compare it with your own city and correct for what's going wrong. So it's a beautiful ideal, but it's realistic. You have to ask everyone to use their power for the well-being of others, or your city's going to fall apart. It's not idealistic, it's realistic. It's idealistic to think you can teach your children to care about money and power and still have a stable society. There's no way that you can do that. And Plato was telling his students, who were the best and brightest, and when you teach college, you're teaching the best and brightest, and they need to learn those same lessons. So that's it. Oops, you're
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Beck, for the kind explanations about the wisdom and what is about the citizen of a day in the ancient Athens. And then it comes to the recent situations, how we could learn from the context of ancient Athens, and then we have somehow sort of knowledge and transformations from the past age to the coming development. Ladies and gentlemen, I will open. Yeah, we have at least 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. If you have any kind of questions, feel free to raise your hand, or you can write down on the chat box for your questions or any kind of response. And then I already put on the chat box the presence attendance list, if you like, and having a certificate of appreciations. You can fill out the Google form of there. One question, Prof. How the connectivity between the ancient Athens to the recent situations, since it might be we can learn from the ancient Athens about the pandemic or any kind of disease or something to face the uh, not only one or two case, but it is the whole of the city of the ancient. Is there any explanation about this? Time is yours, Prof.
Let's see. What was the whole of the city or the whole of the society?
No, I mean, is there any situation at that time from the ancient Greek where there is a spread of disease or any kind of like now we have COVID-19, for example?
Yeah, actually there was, and it killed Pericles. Pericles was their big democratic leader, and he died of the plague. And part of the reason there was a plague was that the Athenians had to protect themselves from Sparta, so they were all caught right in the city, and so the sanitation and things like that got to them, and they had a plague. So there, that was an influence, and it killed their favorite democratic leader. Socrates did not like Pericles because he just told people, you're free. Freedom means the license to live however you like. And he kept spending money on people and on public projects and using, the money from conquest. He flattered people. He gave them whatever they wanted. He called them free. He didn't expect them to be self-controlled or to learn how to think more clearly, or to, avoid war if possible. He flattered them. And so Socrates did not think he was such a great democratic leader, but most of the Athenians did. Anyway, he died of the plague. So that's basically, when you have plagues or something like that, they expose your resilience, right? They expose if your city actually has woven the citizens together so that they have trust and goodwill for each other. So I don't know about your country. I think it was better than my country. My country just exposed the fact that nobody cares about anybody else but themselves. I mean, we opened up the bars before we opened up the schools because it's all about money. I mean, it was so exposed that we're obsessed with money. We don't care about the education of the children. We don't care about anything that we actually depend on each other for. It's this rugged individualism. And oh my gosh, there were Americans that just said they hated government, right? Because government, social justice, is trying to provide public health, public education. And people would say, the government is trying to tell me when I can breathe. I'm not going to wear a mask. The government, they won't let me breathe. It was just so obsessive. There was no concern for public health. It was no idea that you might make some old person sick. Like, it was just no concern at all. I'm free. I can do whatever I want. Get that government out of there, And you try to argue for public health, and it just didn't go anywhere. So that was, I think America was extremely exposed at that point for the fact that democracy, freedom had been completely corrupted. And that happened in Athens. That's the Democratic Personality, Book 8 of the Republic. He just believes freedom, everybody's free to do whatever they want. And everything fell apart. And a strong man, right? They became totally unstable. So an ambitious politician said, if you vote for me, I'm going to get us back to traditional values of law and order, loyalty to your family, patriotism, and traditional religious belief. And we're going to get law and order. We're going to get back to the good old days. We're going to make Athens great again. And they elected him. So obviously, to me, the same thing happened in America. Now you can decide for yourselves. I don't make decisions for people from other countries. I just give the model and I say, I think you could learn from this, but you have to teach me what it is and each other. You have a dialogue with each other, and I like to get in on it about where you think. If you think your country is getting more democratic or less democratic, where you think the problems are, how to fix it, things like that. But the COVID was, a clear way to expose whether the social fabric was very resilient or not. Does that make sense to you?
Thank you, Prof. I come to one note about resilience. So how the citizen going to have the right resilience during the pandemic, disease, and any kind of disaster. Ladies and gentlemen, if you still have any kind of response, want to raise any kind of questions, I'm more than happy to invite you one more questions. Yeah. And then for those who are joining us through the streaming and YouTube, you can write down on the comment your questions, and I would like to read for you to hands-on to Prof. Beck. One more questions, Prof. In the end of our second meeting tonight, what we can see from the ancient Greek to the Indonesia development nowadays, since the administration of Jokowi, we have right now the day of Pancasila, and then Partai Demokrasi Indonesia Perjuangan has the month of Bung Karno. Hold on, I would like to invite Zulkifli Al-Qadri to raise your questions. Zulkifli, time is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Prof. Martha. I'm Zulkifli. I'm from Stayarap Yabnas Jeneponto. So it was really very interesting that you have explained how the description of ancient Athens was. So I was very interested earlier about the life of democracy at the time. In ancient Athens, correct me if I'm wrong, only male citizens were allowed to participate in the democratic process, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners. So considering the significant progress made in modern democracies, where universal suffrage is generally upheld, so how can we reconcile the ideal of equality and inclusivity with the historical exclusionary nature of early democratic systems like Athens?
Okay, so I think the way I've described it would apply for men, women, any kind of race. And there are, in the tragedies, there are a lot of indications that the poets thought that sexism was wrong and that racism was wrong. So, so I don't think the main principle, women can be just as irrational as men and just as rational as men. And people in developing countries can make all the same mistakes, but they're also capable of all the same successes. So the thing about the Enlightenment period is that they didn't treat people equally either. At the beginning, they were racist. Kant, Hume, these people were just flaming racists. And they had a Western superiority complex. So people in developing countries really need to create something new. And so what I really think is you should move forward with Panchasila. You should take the wisdom from the past It can be in Hindu. I mean, if you really wanted to go that way, you wouldn't take any knowledge or wisdom or listen to anybody before now. And I just think, you have a lot to gain by figuring out how to combine the insights of the wisdom traditions with the knowledge of the modern era. The paradigm of knowledge in the modern era is also completely wrong in terms of its foundation. So modern science was based on the assumption the purpose of knowledge is power over nature. The only reason we gain knowledge, the main reason, is to get power over it, unlimited power. So now we do, and we're destroying ourselves. So we have to change what the point of knowledge is. The point is to develop a sustainable society. So that's where you can take the wisdom traditions did want the integration of nature and culture. The modern societies gave us knowledge, but dedicated to unlimited exploitation. So now we have to create something that includes both of those, but definitely dedicated to sustainability. In terms of, let's see, the sexism, right? What the United Nations, that's my next lecture, has the same capabilities, the same kind of, as the Greeks were based on, but now it's irregardless of sex, religious, sexual orientation, ethnicity. So they have been more inclusive. The other thing about the modern era, the psychology was a blank slate. So social sciences were going to mold people so they no longer were greedy or lustful or proud. You could use social science to literally make people good through a system of behavior modification. That has not worked. And now in my country, most of the social science research is dedicated to selling people products they shouldn't be buying, to making military equipment. And so we have to, again, relook at human nature, which is that we're never going to eliminate our instinctual drives. So we need to construct a society where people are motivated to get along with each other and not to be afraid of each other, so they don't overreact and feel threatened and become violent. And also where men and women relate to each other emotionally as equals, not just legally equals. So the notion of human rights, equality, legal equality, you can have very, very immature people who use that doctrine to justify what they're doing. And they can follow the laws, the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. And our founding fathers understood that our Declaration of Independence is not going to work unless we also cultivate virtue. And they actually liked Confucius' Analects. So they were trying to synthesize the ancients with the Enlightenment model. But I do think Indonesians and today, it's systems thinking. We have to think of nature as a big system, and we're part of it. But we can use technology to create sustainable societies. We can use technology, but it has to be driven by wisdom. And a new version of wisdom that's wiser than the old version, but we can gain insights from the past and create something new. Does that answer your question?
Thank you,
Prof. Thank you very much for your kind response. I would like to thank to Prof. Martha. We already have a very good discussions, a fruitful discussion tonight. And then thank you to everyone. And then to my colleague, Pak Zulkifli Al-Qadri already raised a very good response to the Prof. Martabek. Thank you very much, everyone. In the chat box, there is a kind of a Google form. If you like, feel free to fill the Google form, and the committee of the organizing committee of the program will send you the certificate of appreciations. Thank you to Prof. Martabek for this second online meetings of us, and this is a good opportunity for us to have the very good discussions, and then we learn a lot from the ancient Greek, and inshallah by tomorrow we will have the last sessions from 3. It is about cultivate the love of wisdom, tradition, and interdisciplinary. Still with us, Prof. Martabek with us, and hopefully we can see you tomorrow, for the meeting, the same link of us. So even that we are prepared for the burasa and somehow lontong and a lot of things, but still we have time for discussions of the knowledge. Again, thank you, Prof. Marta, for the times, and everyone, thank you. There is from IAI, DDI Sidrap, Sidentren Rapang. We have from STAI, DDI Maros. We have from STAI Yapnas Jeneponto, and the organizing committee from Setia Abdul Haris Makassar. Thank you for everyone. Thank you, Prof. Marta. I do apologize during the delay of our meeting tonight. Because of the technical problem of internet. I'm in the southeast Sulawesi, and somehow cannot reach the good signal. But even though that we have obstacle, we have technical problem, but still we have we already conduct the second meetings of our 3 sessions with Prof. Martabek. See you tomorrow night, and then for those who are Muslim, I invite you to recite once again Hamdalah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin, by the end of the program. And then thank you very much, and have a nice night and lovely dream for tonight. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Prof. Marta. Thank you, everyone. And the Zoom